a little bit more about our organization, and I just want to welcome also Beata and Piotr, who will be joining us a little bit later today. The Bulgarian Foundation for Business and Human Rights is an organization that specializes in advancing the business and human rights agenda in Bulgaria, and also we have interest in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And this is why we are today joined by our partners from the Polish Institute of Human Rights and Business, and also by Piotr Kowalik. So, in what we have prepared for you today is just a general overview of what has happened in the last year with Omnibus, which we followed closely as part of being of the European Coalition for Corporate Justice, for who we are very thankful that we actually are able to run this webinar by through their sponsorship. And so last year we were following the Omnibus very closely, and you will hear today how it has, what's the result with regards to the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, or I will call it the CSDDD. Also, how it connects with other current regulations, and also what will happen, what happens actually in practice. And that's why we're going to talk about the financial sector. Before I again continue with this more in detail discussion, I would like to present my guests today, Beata and Piotr. Beata Faracic, thank you so much for taking this opportunity to join this webinar. Beata is actually a lawyer and the founder of the president of the board of the Polish Institute for Human Rights and Business. And she has a long experience and extensive experience in working in the area of business, human rights, corporate responsibility, ESG. She's conducted a series of trainings on different topics that are related to due diligence, to stakeholder engagement, sustainability matters. She's also a regional an advisor for Central and Eastern Europe for the Global Business Initiative on business and human rights. She sat on numerous different working groups, including the advisory board of the NCP in OECD Poland. And she's currently working, is more engaged in working on the forced labor regulation. Welcome, Beata. It's great to have you here. We'll give you the floor in a few minutes. And Piotr Kowalik, who is a manager with approximately 20 years of experience in advising businesses on ESG strategy, EU taxonomy, sustainable finance. He's currently the manager of ESG risk analysis manager at Bank Gospodarstwa Krajowego. He's also a lecturer in the postgraduate program Strategic ESG Transformation in Enterprise in Warsaw School of Economics. He's also holding different expert roles and works in different working groups. We do have one thing in common with Piotr, and this is that we're both alumni of the Summer Academy organized by the Polish Institute of Human Rights and Business. And if you want to extend your knowledge and to further develop your skills, I highly encourage you to enroll in this academy, which is in September, and it'll be 4th edition. So I'll stop here and with the introductions and go a little bit deeper into why we are here today. As I mentioned, last year we were quite involved in the following of what happened with the Omnibus I proposal, and it actually has quite significant impact for companies, but also we want to say for workers and for rights holders, because at the onset of the CSDDD, it was really important to focus to know that in the focus was on what are the options for protecting workers' rights, right holders, and also to ensure that they have access to justice. And in Bulgaria at the moment, as other countries around the EU, we are starting the process of the transposition of the CSDDD. While some countries are advancing pretty well, some not so much, but we're just at an early stage. For Bulgaria, particularly, it's really important also timing, because just 3-4 days ago, I read that we are advancing quite well in the accession of the OECD, which is supposed to happen by the end of the year. And as we know, for all the experts who work in the area of business and human rights, the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business Human Rights and the OECD guidelines on multinational companies are actually our core documents and framework that we rely on. And the concept of due diligence, the obligation of due diligence is well developed as a foundation of principles in the UNGPs. And when we talk about the OECD, we look at more practical applications. So it is an important aspect of the future of work and the connection between sustainability, human rights, and what's happening. So I'll just quickly share my presentation just to take you through some of the points that I wanted to discuss with you. Okay, and you see my screen? Yes, no issues with this. So,
Yes.
where are we? Thank you, Piotr. So, where are we today? As I mentioned, in July 2024, the CSDD entered into a force, but in February, we had the proposal of the Omnibus amending the package which was offered. And so what happened was the Omnibus package actually now that is into force, is making a few changes to the initial CSDD proposal. A couple of words from our perspective as experts who work on the field, and also from a civil society perspective. One of the criticism of this proposal was the lack of consultation, very rush decisions, and it didn't allow for time for interested stakeholders to present their concerns about the new proposal. Anyways, liking or not liking, we do have new piece of legislation or changed, which is now due to be transposed into our international legislations by 26th of July 2028. And we have now the application phase, which begins by July 2029, with by 2031, we'll have the first official review of the directive. So what are some of the main changes to the directive, and why that we wanted to mention with you is looking at the original text of the CSDDD, the one I mentioned from 2024. There is definitely a significant reduction of the scope of companies that fall under the current text, which is it's less than 70%, and it really covers very large companies. In Bulgaria alone, we don't have directly companies in scope, not just yet. There are a group of companies. I understand that, and there are 5, I think, in 5. Also in Poland, we're looking at around 50, but of course the list is being updated. In Bulgaria, there might be changes, and this is of course now raising the question: what do we do? Why do we need to talk about and have this conversation whilst we're not in scope, and hopefully by the next few hour, half an hour or so, we will convince you that you can do a lot and it's important. So the due diligence obligation, which is as I mentioned earlier, for with the UNGPs and the OECD guidelines, is the core obligation that companies are required, will be required to have. But the difference is that before we had a full value chain mapping and opportunity for in-depth assessment the entire value chain to all identified risks. However, this is changing. We're now looking at risk-based scoping approach, which is based on reasonable available information, and mapping is replaced by scoping, and we don't have in-depth assessment. The in-depth assessment is just linked to high-risk areas. So in one word, you can have apply this due diligence by identifying, applying a risk-based approach, and of course, based on severity and impact. When it comes to stakeholders, we have a narrow now we're looking at the stakeholders narrowly. Only affected people and workers are able to bring some claims and to be directly and to speak. And also, when we talk about one of the biggest issues for us from a civil liability perspective was that the EU-wide harmonized liability regime was removed. And now we have it's going to be changed to now primarily on national law only, which means that not having the harmonized regime will require to apply the 27 different regimes in each country. And like in Bulgaria, we're now in the process of potentially calling a legal study to see how the civil liability regime relates to this to corporate accountability and everything that's developing with due diligence. And finally, it's very important. We're talking about climate plans, that mandatory climate transition plans were removed, which is a kind of a fall, or not fall, but a very disappointing, because this was a requirement which would have made companies more accountable and put in place climate transition plan, because it's critical to know that when we're talking about human rights due diligence, it's important to look at it and also in any environment. So you would see quite often that we refer as human rights and environmental due diligence. And of course, there is a bit of less monitoring, which is changed. So a few weaker enforcement tools. So I'll end this presentation here to leave you with some of the good remarks and interventions that Beata and Piotr have actually prepared for you. If you have any questions, and during this presentation, you are more than welcome to ask them after the presentation, or just write them in the chat. I will stop sharing, and I will invite Beata to start her presentation.
Many thanks, Olya, for handing me over the floor, and good afternoon to everybody who has joined us today. And I have to say that it's really a great pleasure to be able to do a webinar together with another foundation, another NGO from Central Eastern Europe, because for a long time, Polish Institute was a single organization operating in the region, which, given the importance of the topic, it was really something that we're looking with a huge concern, simply because the companies from our region are very often in the supply chains of the companies that are falling under both CSDDD and other regulations. And basically, they will be on the receiving end of requests for information and data from the large international companies operating globally, but also using suppliers from the region. So therefore, even though it seems that the regulation is not covering any company in in Bulgaria, or just 50 companies, in Poland, in fact, the trickle down effect will be felt by many more companies. And following what Olia just said about the strength and of the CSDDD being quite significantly limited, I just want to stress that what we observe in Poland, and I think Piotr will also mention later on, that is that companies are kind of thinking, okay, there will be less of the obligations. We don't need to do that much, so we can just put it away. We can deal with that perhaps in a year or two, and we see less attention being given to the ESG issues more generally, and human rights aspects especially. And this, I have to stress, is extremely short-sighted because, first of all, I think it's important to see the due diligence and human rights and an environmental due diligence basically as risk, as a process that is meant to manage risks. And obviously, it's the one that focuses on the risk to people, which is generated by or in connection with the company operations, and is aimed either at the prevention or mitigation. And we know that this process is described in full in UN guiding principles and in the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct. And if we kind of look at the fact that CSDDD is so much more narrower compared to those two international BHR standards, I mean, we cannot kind of escape realization that, well, basically the risk management process that we are getting through CSDDD is compromised from the outset. I mean, it does have some areas where there are holes from the outset. And if you're meant to undertake a risk assessment, kind of you want it to be complete, particularly if this, whether you will stay in the supply chain of a large company, will depend on how complete data you'll be able to provide. And obviously, I think everybody realizes that the biggest risk are the risks which are unknown. And therefore, I would strongly encourage all the companies that, at least those that are in the supply chains or that are trying to or will be applying for some capital or credits and so on, to really kind of look into those international standards and try to develop due diligence processes that are tailored to their size and sector. And sometimes companies are getting scared of the process, forgetting and kind of look into the examples that are developed by huge international companies, forgetting that basically what the UNGPs are expecting them to do and OECD guidelines are expecting them to do is to develop due diligence processes that are tailored to their size and also resources and so on. So this is important to mention because I think in all this talk about CSDDD implementation and how much less companies can do, companies do forget what is the ultimate purpose of the due diligence, and this is managing risks. And obviously, the risks generated to people by the company will fire back kind of on the way back to the company, because if there will be let's say some accidents and people will lose life, automatically it will create an outfall on the company and its finances, either through increased insurance or through interrupted production processes because of the police and prosecution involvement and so on and so on. Second point that I would like to make is also that it's a huge mistake to think that the whole path forward with regards to the human rights and kind of broader social dimension is relying just on a single regulatory act adopted at the EU level, namely CSDDD. Well, yes, we did have a lot of hope that CSDDD will kind of rightly set up the process, but it's not the only regulation that is addressing those issues around human rights, social issues, and so on. In fact, we do have a variety, partially overlapping regulations, and I'll name a few in a moment, we do have also expectations and data needs of the financial sector, partially also spurred by by the regulations like taxonomy and sustainable finance disclosure regulation. We do have also expectations of the more responsible companies on the market. Just in Poland, we've been just asked by a large international Swedish company to undertake some, let's say, human rights impact monitoring visits and awareness raising visits with some of their suppliers. Because when doing a broad assessment of their potential, of the risks that they are potentially creating in the supply chain, some issues came up that they want to have addressed. And what I think is very encouraging is that at present, what we notice is that the large international companies are trying to kind of increasingly work with suppliers, understanding that they need to provide some support and advice, simply because their suppliers might not, or other business partners might simply not be in place or not have the resources to be able to gain the necessary know-how by themselves. And I did mention a couple of regulations, or pieces of legislation which we have at the European level. So obviously we do have taxonomy, which sets a criteria for assessing whether a project or a company or investment is sustainable or not. And we have a very clear reference in Article 18 to UNGPs and OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. And thus we have this very full direct reference to basically to the full human rights and environmental due diligence. So even though CSDDD has limited scope when it comes to due diligence, under taxonomy, if we want to seek capital, we will need to actually prove that we are complying with the UNGPs and OECD guidelines and not necessarily just CSDDD. So already here we do have this need to go broader. And obviously, even though the transposition deadline and kind of obligations for companies with regards to CSDDD will kick in only in like first 2028 and for the companies in 2029, well, if you will be applying for any loans and some funds for investment from financial institutions, well, it won't be enough to say, oh, I'll have my procedures ready by, 2029. I mean, you'll have to provide this information straight away. So it makes no sense to delay implementation and trying to incorporate or embed, actually, this should be kind of more correct word, the due diligence into your operations. The other piece of legislation which is worth mentioning as well is obviously EU deforestation regulation, or in short, EUDR, which is basically another regulation that introduces due diligence obligations to prove that regulated commodities placed on or exported from the EU are deforestation-free, legally produced, and fully traceable. And it's quite interesting. And I mean, I won't be going into detail because we don't have that much time. But the regulation distinguishes between operators and downstream operators and traders, and it sets mandatory due diligence regulations, rules for operators that place commodities on the market or export them. And basically, they are required to trace the products they sell back to the plot of land where they were produced and declare that they have exercised due diligence. So I think it's quite interesting that we do have under EUDRs this expectation and kind of basically understanding that it is possible to track the supply chain down to the origins, to the original plot from which specific commodity was sourced. But we do have so many concerns about it when it comes to CSDDD implementation. So I mean, there are some, I would say, gaps in logic, or when it comes to the fact that sometimes something seems feasible and sometimes not. And yes, I admit, I mean, there are differences when it comes to the sectors. I admit that there are differences when it comes to the complexity of the supply chains, which kind of different sectors and sometimes even between the companies. But basically, it's about how robust is your risk management process simply with regards to your impacts on human rights. And just to highlight, even though EUDR kind of focuses on the deforestation, it also takes into account protecting human rights related to deforestation. And it's also about respecting the principles of free and prior and informed consent of indigenous peoples that might be living in the areas that might be affected. And I won't be talking, I mean, if we'll have time later on, and if there is interest, we can talk about the penalties, but just to highlight that penalties can be quite significant. And it's not up to states. It's basically UDR, it's regulation. So basically it's automatically binding and applicable. So already companies need to be aware that they need to be doing those things. And given that the commodities covered by this regulation, which is which is cattle, cocoa, coffee, oil palm, rubber, soy, and obviously wood. I mean, things made from those original ingredients, I mean, they are found in so many things and in so many products. I mean, soy or oil palm, like probably majority of sweets, sweet products in Europe are made with oil palm and so on. So you'll kind of find those things in many places. So it's kind of also a signal that companies that will be implementing or that will be obliged to kind of implement obligations under CSDDD, that they can actually also learn from the experiences of the operators who are supposed to undertake some efforts under EUDR already. And then we've got
Yeah,
more. I
sorry
know
for
I'm
it.
already
Yes,
over
yes,
the
I
time,
know.
so let's just mention
No,
two things.
I
Just
just
one.
want to give you
Forced
two
labor
minutes
regulation.
for the forced labor regulation. If we don't
Okay,
cover it, we can cover it in the question. Just wanted to, to
okay.
let you know.
Forced labor regulation. Just to mention, it's important simply because this regulation introduces a ban on products made with forced labor, and it's basically ensuring that they cannot be sold in the EU, so that they can be withdrawn from the market, they can be disposed of, there can be a restriction of access. And this is important also because, I mean, you won't be able to trace forced labor in your supply chain unless you've got properly set due diligence process. So again, one more argument why it makes sense to start implementing, or let's say setting up the due diligence process in your companies already now, even though CSDDD seems to be so much more limited and kind of without teeth, because we've got a number of other regulations that actually do have teeth. And yes, I'll stop here. Thank you.
That was great. 2 minutes for less than 2 minutes for the forced labor regulation, but I trust that it's a separate topic that needs its attention. And of course, it's not the time, but maybe for our next topics that we will be looking at. And I heard you saying, talking about the investment and banks and what's happening and what are the expectations. So we can now hear from Piotr, who will tell us from the bank and from the practice. Piotr, you can take a little bit of longer time. As you can see, we both with Beata can talk for hours, but take a little bit of more time, and we will continue the discussion after your intervention. Welcome.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with you as my colleague from the Summer Academy, and also as a person that tried to educate the market participants on the current state of affairs, because it's quite challenging to follow the regulations, but as Data said, maybe they are not that much important because the obligations are there, irrespective of omnibuses that would be adopted. So I will try to share my short presentation. Just a moment. Okay, do you see my screen?
Yes, we do.
Great. Okay, so I work at Banku Gospodarstwa Krajowego, which is not a very typical bank because it's a Polish development bank. We support our government in implementing economic policies, mainly through servicing commissioned activities like, for example, servicing EU Recovery Fund or some national financing programs. But also we conduct typical commercial activities like lending money to companies and municipalities. So today I would like to present this perspective of financial institution that deals with ESG risks and impacts. But at the beginning, I would like to stress one point because Data and Olya talked a lot about risks. And there is important differentiation between risk to people and environment that is covered by due diligence processes, and the risk perspective, the financial perspective that is included in CSRD directive, the SRS reporting standards. So this financial perspective, the risk perspective, is something that the financial sector is dealing with, mainly because of the risk perspective is the core of the legal framework that try to deal with systematic risk that is embedded in the financial sector. So all the regulations that comes from EU or from national governments are trying to deal with the risk that financial sector can pose to the economy and society. And this is also why we in financial institution, why we are looking at risks, because at the bottom of the slide you have typical risks that financial institutions are dealing with, like mostly credit risk and operational risk, market risk, but also liquidity risk and business risk. These are typical financial risks that all financial institutions are dealing with. But in that risks, ESG risks are being recognized as part of this risk, not a separate set of risks, but something that is included, embedded within those typical financial risks that banks are trying to deal with. So if we have a client, then we will analyze his business plan, its operations, its investment strategy, the investment plans, how the client wants to use the proceeds that it will receive from the bank. But within this analysis, we also try to recognize whether there are any ESG risks that we can single out. So when we think about a company that wants to get a financing instrument, financial financing from the bank, then we'll look at environmental risks that are associated with the business and also with its business partners. We'll also look at social risk and governance risk that are related to that entity. But these risks translates into financial risks through different channels. So not always it's a direct link, like, a company is polluting water and then it will receive a fine that will impact its financial standing. But sometimes it's more complex translation from economy and through some social groups. So these are the risks that we are thinking about when we think about risks, as opposed to risks that Olya and Bata were talking about, risks to environment and society. So if this risk materialize, then we will expect some financial impacts to the entity, and at the end to the possibility that the entity will repay its debt. But at the same time, we need to look at ESG impacts. So the ESG impacts are spread across our entire operation. So we'll have that in our procurement, we'll have that in our own operations, but we also have that, and this is the huge area of analysis within our credit portfolio. So all the agreements that were executed with our clients will include some ESG impacts. What you can see at the slide, this bit formal wording, contributing, being directly linked, or causing negative impacts. This is the wording that we take from the OCT guidelines, sectoral guidelines for financial institutions, how financial institutions should understand their link to negative impacts, especially those related to their clients. So when we think about the impact that could be involved in a financing, our ESG risks analysis could be helpful because we often see that some negative impact will translate into ESG risk, financial risk. So as this example with a company polluting a river, which is a negative impact to the environment, then this negative impact will translate into a fine that will impact financial standing of a company. But when we look at these impacts, we also have to understand our role as a bank, as an entity that profit from lending money for some investments, how our profit is related to this negative impact, and therefore what are our obligations related to this situation. And when you think about human rights in business environment, then we think about how our financing influence the social area. Data talked about forced labor regulation. As you know, Poland has some problems with forced labor, which relates from our geopolitical situation, but also from the sheer size of the economy. So we understand that our clients can be exposed to forced labor in our economy. So then when we interact with our clients through questionnaires or direct communication, we want to understand whether they are affected by these forced labor, whether they are exposed to a risk that they will have negative impact on people through their involvement in the employment market. But coming back to the regulations, we as a bank, for the time being, will not be covered by CSDDD. We will be covered by CSRD reporting, but at the time we decided to report voluntarily under simplified versus the draft of the standards. So most of the regulations that we are taking account are the financial sector regulations, which impose an obligation for a bank to manage its ESG risks, being part of other financial risks that the bank should take care of. But we also think about our clients being part of international networks of business relations. So we think about our clients being in supply chain of a company that can expect some responsible behaviors from our clients. We think about our clients being part of a supply chain of a public sector that announce public procurements, contests, and we will see, and this is also part of the sanctions under EUDR, that companies that violates the regulations will be excluded for a period of time from public procurement. So we want to understand whether our client can contribute to violations of human rights and therefore lose its chance to be part of supply chain to this international client that expects responsible behaviors, or whether our client can lose access to public procurement. So, which then would translate into its financial situation and its possibility to repay the debt, the financing that we'll give it. So this is
Piotr,
why, yeah.
Sorry, Piotr, just letting you know that I did give you some extra time, but
Okay.
maybe we'll just leave some time just to wrap it up so we can leave some time for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is my closing remark, that we will look not that much on the regulations that are on the market or not. We will look at an entity within value chain and its possibility to remain in that value chain because of responsible behaviors and expectations of its stakeholders, like financial institutions or clients, to remain responsible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piotr. This was really helpful and raises quite a few questions already in my head, but I think it's the time for now to give the floor to our guests and our participants. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand, or you can just put them in the chat. Okay, we don't have at the moment. I can start with a couple of questions that came out, and one of them is related to this provision of information. So one of the benefits or one of the pluses that many supporters of the Omnibus mentioned was the fact that now when it comes to asking for information in the supply chain, the small, medium, especially the impact on the small, medium enterprises was that there is not that much information, or it's it's not as thorough. And what my question is, often that we've been asked is, well, how do we rely on this information? How do we first, how do we request? To what extent is this information, and how we can rely on this? And this is pretty much similar to what Piotr, you said about how you make assessments and the questions that you ask the entity and whether they're in the supply chain. So this thing about the questions, I think it's very important. And the other thing, I'll just ask the question to both of you, but also, as we said, Bulgaria is a country where we don't have many companies in scope. Yes, we heard about regulations, but if we want to start on working on due diligence, or just to look where we are at, what are 2, 3 things that you could just recommend that one could do? And maybe I'll start. Beata, would you like to answer the first question or the first comment?
Kind of the first things that came to my mind when you kind of mentioned that, yes, I mean, in theory, now companies are covered by CSDDD in Bulgaria. But then I thought, yes, but even though you won't have kind of like a proactive obligation, you will receive requests for information, or the supervisory authority will receive requests for information from other states who will be examining those companies that fall under CSDDD in their countries, and and those companies that will be in their first tier. So there will be demand for information from companies anyway. And the same, as was actually stressed by me and also Piotr, there will be those requests for information from other actors, be it those global corporations or basically financial institutions that are crucial to when it comes to obtaining funding. So I think that, yeah, perhaps I should put that in this place and hand over to Piotr.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so all the banks have some questionnaires that they hand out to companies. Those questionnaires in recent years have been heavily extended to include ESG components, to ask about physical risks, about climate adaptation, but also about working conditions, about supply chains and practices that are in the supply chain. What I would expect that the big companies that would be covered by CSDD, they will have consultants, they will have advisors, they will prepare, but they, at the same time, they will expect more and more from their business partners down the value chain. And from my perspective, working on the risk assessment, it's a good thing, because if I know that a company is part of a value chain of a big company that is subject to CSDDD, I may be a bit comfortable that this company has already been trained, that has already been instructed by this big company, its client, that somehow it'll be more mature if it comes to due diligence than other smaller entities. But at the same time, please remember that we still see development of new EU regulations that more or less directly address environmental issues, address social issues. For example, Industry Acceleration Act that will introduce green steel, green aluminium, green cement obligations in public procurement. But how it would be defined, whether this green will be combined with human rights issues, like in case of EUDR, we will see in delegated acts. But we may expect that this sustainability component will be part of public procurement. So not only being part of big international value chains, but also working on the ground within your national economy may also results from due diligence, will result in due diligence obligations.
Thank you,
If I
Piotr.
could perhaps, oh, sorry. Oh, yeah.
No, that's okay. No, that's okay. Better go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Kind of what Piotr said just kind of made me realize one more thing is we are in this very strange interim period currently between the time when the legislation was adopted and the time when it really kind of starts, when those applications will be binding on the companies and when they will need to implement them in everyday life and prove it. Simply because at this stage we are kind of having the companies need to prepare for that, but at the same time we are still waiting for the guidance, various sets of guidance actually, to be developed by the European Commission or by national states, because under some regulations it is required of domestic institutions to develop some guidance. And I hope that it will be much, much easier once this guidance is out for everybody to operate and kind of know how to interpret certain provisions. Also, states will need to kind of ensure relatively, or at least should ensure relatively coherent transposition and implementation of various regulations from the Green Deal area. And so hopefully in the process, some of the contradictions or kind of incoherences that we've got at present, hopefully some of this will be mended. Maybe I'm a little bit over optimistic, but I would really see great support to companies if this was the case, if the states really took kind of this more proactive role and try to ensure more coherence when it comes to how they implement individual regulations. So yeah. And just a point, it's not just states, it's not just European Commission, there are also some other actors who are developing different tools that are meant to support companies, some of them backed by AI, some of them more of a tick box sort of approach type of tools, but there are also a number of groups that are working, for example, on modern contract clauses or some other issues that will be released relatively go and take tools for the companies and for them to implement in their everyday operations. And I think what we need to kind of focus now is exactly this sort of support to companies. Stop just kind of writing like how important certain things are, but just really focus on developing specific tools that companies can use. And last sentence, companies need to, however, be really aware that however perfect the tool will be, they will still need to kind of ensure that it fits into their own operations and that it's adjusted to their own context. So thank you.
I think, but I think this is why we decided to start working in this direction. First, to have these conversations and to say that yes, we are aware that regulation is there, it's coming. Not sure how it's going to apply, but there is so much that can be done because of this and this. And I think we've shown today. And as I said, there's a lot of conversations separate that we can have on the different topics. I do think that one of the questions that often comes, and I know that we have only a few minutes and I asked the question, but I will go back to this. Of course, it is important on practical level. Let's say, let's focus on two things that if you are a company that wants to work in this area, despite the fact that you're not in scope, what are the two key things you could do? And you have both 4 minutes to do this. So not to put the pressure. But Peter, do you want to go first this time? Two things.
Okay. First of all, I think I would implement a process to identify my clients, my business partners, from both the downstream and upstream side, to to understand who I'm dealing with, what are the problems that may be related to them, and simply start a conversation about our environmental and social impact, and what we can do with that.
Great, thank you. So you're going straight to the partners. That's interesting. Well, Beata, but it's important, but Beata, what's your take on this?
Actually, I do agree with Piotr that you need to start talking to your partners. But when I mean partners, not only business partners, but also stakeholders that might be affected. So you kind of need to do at least the scoping exercise, which is a limited one, but at least start from mapping your stakeholders or rights holders that you're affecting. And the thing that is also linked to that, and what is very often underestimated, is make sure that you've got really effective working grievance mechanisms within your operations. Because very often this can be exactly the source of very sensitive information that you don't really want to be first read about in the newspapers, but you really want to kind of be able to deal with that if the issue arises internally. So I would definitely look into the grievance mechanisms and complaints channels that I've got in my company, and make sure that they are compliant with the effectiveness criteria of the UNGPs, in particular UNGP 31. Again, some things that many companies are totally underestimating and don't see the value, whereas it's one of the best sources of information.
Great, thank you, Beata. And I'll just add to this that it's surprising that companies are already doing quite a few things, and often maybe it's also good time to check where you at within your own processes, because you might find different elements of human rights and environmental due diligence, maybe not a full process, but through the different policies and processes that you're already engaging. So it's not that it's not there, it's just probably not put together in a coherent way. Well, I would like to thank you both for this presentation today, for this conversation. It's been extremely helpful, and I already have ideas for several more of these conversations together and with other guests. So Beata, thank you, and Piotr, and for everyone who joined us today. And again, to all the team of the ECJ for making this happen. I wish everyone a beautiful afternoon. And if you do have a questions, or if you want for us to talk on some of the topics, please get in touch with us, and we'll make sure that we cover them in the following sessions.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much, and many thanks for initiating this series. So
thank you.